Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. As you know, the world is facing a striking break with precedent in terms of national security. Canada faces risks of a magnitude not seen in our estimation since the War of 1812. In that conflict, like now, we saw world turmoil where great powers acted with narrow interests and where even our allies were unpredictable. As you said in Davos, Prime Minister, the rules-based order is fading. In this historic moment, you've given us a serious task to create a focused and strategic national security policy that will protect Canada's sovereignty. In the words of poet and soldier John McCrae, Canada's torch is ours to hold high. My name is Hale Mahan, and I am part of a team at the National Security Renewal Task Force within the Privy Council office. Our team consists of myself, Quinn Boswell, Coral Kasira Kareen, Noor Malik, and Eugenia Opiku. Today, we will present our priorities, policy options, and implementation considerations. Next slide, please. Thank you. Canada is worth protecting. We have a proud set of principles that deliver security and trust for Canadians and that have become a beacon to the world. You can see some examples on your screen. The fundamental freedoms of our charter, the understanding for diversity that defines and strengthens us, our strong democracy and rule by legitimate law applying to people and the state, and our respect for the world that has made the world respect us. As you mentioned in Davos, Prime Minister, we must be both principled and pragmatic. We strongly believe that the strategy we will share today is both. Next slide, please. So how do we make sense of this issue that faces us? Our analysis points towards three key areas of change that demand our national attention. First, Canada's military capability is degrading. In fact, many of our own armed forces vehicles are outdated and unserviceable. This degradation is occurring alongside increasing economic and geopolitical conflict across the world. Continuing tariff use threatens Canada's trade-based economy, and significant conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East are still ongoing. Second, Canada's Arctic regions face increasing threats of sovereignty and climate change. Distant states like China are developing a clear trade-based interest in the Arctic, a rapidly warming area which threatens ecosystems, infrastructure, and indigenous cultures. Third, the rapid pace of technological development creates new possibilities of conflict, including coercive techniques by foreign adversaries. Artificial intelligence is blurring the lines of truth and fiction, and there are significant security risks like espionage over our own research and development activities. This is a wide-ranging set of issues, but defining them clearly helps us to establish strategic priorities with concrete policy solutions. Next slide, please.
For every dollar spent on capital defense, 75 cents goes to the USA, demonstrating our reliance on an unpredictable partner. While enlistment in the Canadian military has increased almost 13% in 2025, largely as a response to saber rattling from America, increased personnel levels risks further exacerbating the lack of equipment for our military. The Strategic Joint Staff has called for an increase in reserve forces from 30,000 to 100,000 and the creation of a 300,000 strong supplementary volunteer force in what they term a whole-of-society approach, which would introduce further demands for military equipment. In order to maintain our independence from new threats such as the hyper-nationalistic iteration of America, as well as to insulate our economy from tariff-related threats, Canada's industrial sector must be strengthened in alignment with the whole-of-society vision. Canadian businesses are currently not able to compete on the same level as many foreign competitors, who often benefit from government subsidies to develop their products. Moreover, Canada has a lackluster international reputation for defense-related products, a reputation further exacerbated when the Canadian military does not procure their products, demonstrating a lack of faith in our domestic-sourced equipment. Canada must improve the competitiveness of its defense industry, both domestically and internationally, while lessening its dependence on foreign-sourced military equipment, particularly from unreliable partners such as the US. Next slide, please.
Prime Minister, you've said in Iqaluit that Arctic sovereignty is a strategic priority of this government. This was timely considering four glaring gaps currently define Canada's Arctic posture, and each one is progressively worse. First is governance fragmentation. At least 5 federal departments run separate Arctic programs with separate overhead and no unified strategy. The Auditor General has flagged this coordination failure repeatedly, and Indigenous communities who hold land claims across Inuit Nunangat are consulted late instead of co-governance being established from the beginning. Detection gaps are another problem. The Port of Churchill is Canada's only Arctic region deepwater port for over 106,000 miles of coastline, and it's seasonal and locked by ice for much of the year, connected by a single rail line that has already failed once, and it's located in Manitoba, not the deep Arctic. Compare that to Russia's 40 icebreakers and dozens of year-round ports. Nanisivik Naval Facility was supposed to close the gap, but has been delayed with no confirmed operational date. We have the world's longest Arctic coastline and almost no permanent capacity to service, supply, or monitor it. Our sustained Arctic presence is necessary considering the rise in strategic activity. Russia and China are expanding their Arctic military and commercial presence rapidly. The Northwest Passage is becoming passable, and Canada does not have the infrastructure to monitor or control who is using it. This increased access is attributed primarily to climate change. The Arctic is warming at 4 times the global rate. Melting permafrost is already destroying existing infrastructure. Roads are sinking, runways are crumbling, and foundations are failing. But the same warming is opening new navigational routes, which transforms Arctic sovereignty from a long-term planning issue into one that is an immediate operational priority. Next slide, please.
Thank you. Canada is at a sovereignty turning point. As more of our economy and critical services move online, our exposure to cyber threats continues to grow. Priority number 3 extends the government's Buy Canadian approach to the digital sector, prioritizing Canadian technology in defense and border procurement. The goal here is clear: increase control over critical systems, intellectual property, and source code while reducing reliance on foreign-owned technologies. This priority also strengthens screening for high-risk partnerships and improves Canada's ability to counter cyber attacks and election interference. Together, these measures protect Canada's digital infrastructure while supporting domestic innovation and growth. Next slide, please. In terms of the policy options we considered, our policy option number 1, the Sovereign Capabilities Initiative, is the one we're recommending. It strengthens military readiness, Arctic sovereignty, and digital security through a coordinated strategy that delivers both economic and national security outcomes. It combines the strongest elements of the other options into one cohesive plan. My colleague Quinn will expand on this shortly. Our second option adopts a continuous capability sustainment model using long-term contracts to support Canadian industry. While this promotes economic sovereignty, it does risk reducing competition and raising costs, particularly since Canada lacks the capacity to produce many advanced systems at scale. A rapid shift could also delay acquisitions and affect readiness. Our third option, the Coordinated Operations Strategy, focuses on improving coordination and internal processes. While valuable, it prioritizes process over concrete capability. And in today's threat environment, Canada needs tangible military and digital tools, not just better coordination. For that reason, we recommend option number 1. Next slide, please.
After an analysis of the priority areas pertaining to national security, it is recommended that the government implement the Sovereign Capabilities Initiative as its national security strategy. Firstly, it recognizes that the Canadian government has already allocated an unprecedented investment in defense spending, which, while necessary, requires convincing Canadians who have historically been reluctant to spend on defense of its necessity both in the immediate as well as the long term. To that end, the national security strategy must deliver both improved defense capabilities as well as demonstrable economic impacts for Canadian citizens. As a result, the first component of the initiative focuses on bolstering the domestic defense industry as well as key civilian industry partners. Under this initiative, the government will pair the increase in defense-related contracts awarded to Canadian partners with funding directed to defense-related civilian companies, such as Algoma Steel, or with Canadian pulp mills and the tariff-impacted forestry sector for the purposes of producing nitrocellulose. This funding will be for the purposes of maintaining current operations, ensuring that Canadian defense firms can access the critical raw materials they require at a reasonable price within the domestic market. The initiative will also ensure the continuous update of the Defense Capabilities Blueprint so that potential procurement contracts available for Canadian businesses to pursue are communicated to the domestic defense sector. Next slide, please. Relatedly, the initiative will direct funding to the development of infrastructure, both civilian and military, within the Arctic. Regarding the military infrastructure, this funding will improve the early warning capabilities and military facilities critical for monitoring the Canadian Arctic to guard against foreign encroachment. In particular, the funding will contribute to the development of year-round military capabilities in the region, such as improving Nanisivik. It would also move the northern headquarters of the Coast Guard from Yellowknife, which is not located on the coast, to Iqaluit, further reinforcing our control over the Northwest Passage. These military improvements would enable improved monitoring and responsiveness for the Canadian military and Coast Guard. In tandem with the Arctic military infrastructure funding, funding for civilian infrastructure will ensure that military personnel and materiel can more easily access the region, improving the response times of our military in the event of an aggressive act by an adversary. This funding will also increase the likelihood that military personnel will be more amenable to living in the region, assisting in personnel retention. By expanding the civilian infrastructure and economic capability of the Arctic region, more Canadians are likely to choose to live there, expanding our footprint in the region and demonstrating to the world that it is in fact Canadian territory. The final plank of the strategy relates to emerging technological threats. In order to ensure Canadian sovereignty, as well as the capabilities of both the military and the broader economy, the protection of intellectual property, or IP, is essential. Defense procurement should primarily focus on securing the IP and source code of the equipment, such as the current ETTA framework Canada has negotiated with Japan. This approach ensures that the equipment acquired for the military is capable of being deployed against any potential adversary. This policy will also indirectly assist in reducing our dependence on American military equipment, in accordance with your direction, Prime Minister, as many American suppliers are either individually reluctant or barred by their government's direction to transfer the IP and source code, in contrast to other international partners such as South Korea. In tandem with this policy, the initiative will seek to protect Canadian business IP from industrial espionage by designating vulnerable businesses as militarily essential contractors, ensuring their operations fall under the Canadian Industrial Security Standard, increasing protections for the business. This policy will expand on the first phase of the Canadian Program for Cybersecurity Certification and introduce safe harbor protections for the defense industry. Finally, under this initiative, the government will seek to join the EU's efforts to develop an AI alternative to the American options and host a Canadian-related AI data centers on Canadian soil, so that it is under the auspices of Canadian law, which is critical as our federal service continues to expand its reliance on AI. Overall, the initiative will ensure Canadian businesses are provided with the clarity, resources, and protection needed to thrive domestically and internationally, providing versatile benefits to the economy while improving the capability of the military to react to emerging threats in an ever-expanding threat environment. Next slide, please.
The implementation spans 3 phases over 10 years. Phase 1 is the foundation. We set benchmarks, we launch reviews, and we build the frameworks that Phase 2 will deliver against. The Nana-Civic Review is deliberately scoped as a review because of its chronic delays, and we're not going to repeat the mistake of over-promising on Arctic infrastructure. We extend cybersecurity certification beyond defense into critical infrastructure because retaining IP through better procurement means nothing if it gets stolen through the back door. And we start designing the sovereign AI data center. Everything in Phase 1 is administrative, and there is no legislation. This is doable within 1 parliamentary term, regardless of minority dynamics. Phase 2 is where results become visible. Defense contracts start flowing to Canadian firms, Arctic logistics upgrades, and a forward Coast Guard operating base put real assets on the actual coastline. And we have the AI data center come online. Domestic nitrocellulose and steel production begins, targeting 2029. And critically, we conduct a 4-year evaluation as our accountability checkpoint. In Phase 3, we consolidate. We have year-round Arctic capability, IP retention is the norm, and cybersecurity is integrated across the defense and civilian sectors. Significantly, the initiative will support the achievement of 40,000 to 50,000 jobs. Next slide, please.
The total cost of the initiative is projected to range from $20.5 to $28 billion. The reason for this range is that the $20.5 billion is composed of already identified spending in the key priority areas, which is contained within the 2025 budget. The remaining $8 billion is projected incremental expenditure over the next decade, in accordance with the government's direction to reach the NATO target of 5% of GDP invested in critical defense-related spending. This provides the government with optional scalability, as the additional spending can be accepted, modified, or rejected outright as priorities shift over time without fundamentally undermining the benefit of the program. As a result, the budget has the benefit of not necessarily including any new spending measures. The $20.5 billion earmarked for this initiative will be redirected or spent from already committed spending in these areas that either overlap with the identified priority areas or have not yet been allocated to a specific project. The procurement reform segment of the budget will be funded under the auspices of the Defense Investment Agency and the Defense Industrial Strategy, and the initiative will simply ensure that the expenditure of those programs is aligned with the defense industrial base priority area, such as ensuring that the defense capabilities blueprint is updated or partnering with pulp mills to produce nitrocellulose. The Arctic infrastructure expenditure will be drawn from projects such as the existing Arctic Infrastructure Fund, directing those funds to provide both a civilian and military benefit in the Arctic. The final component of the budget, focusing on securing and safeguarding our technological sovereignty from threats, improves cybersecurity defense protocols, and develops Canadian digital alternatives to increase control over critical systems to protect Canadian businesses as well as the broader public from emerging threats. The potential new incremental spending over the next decade is focused on filling in the gaps within pre-existing programs, such as improving NanoCivic, relocating the Arctic Coast Guard headquarters, and continuing to build data centers on Canadian soil. Next slide, please.
As you have said, Prime Minister, the work of defending Canada is the work of building Canada. The top row will be our core federal stakeholders in line with this sentiment. DND will lead the strategic direction and the defense capabilities blueprint, while the new Defense Investment Agency serves as the procurement engine that rolls out IP-first mandates and domestic sourcing targets. The Armed Forces and North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, provide Arctic presence and continental defense, and on the threat side, CSC, Public Safety, and CSIS cover cyber intelligence, cybersecurity certification for defense suppliers, and countering industrial espionage. Global Affairs handles the EU market diversification and navigates the increasingly nuanced relationship with the United States. PSPC and ISED will drive procurement reform and the Sovereign AI Data Center. Treasury Board will govern the phased funding approvals to establish accountability. ITK and Nunavut Tungavik are co-governors from the beginning because any infrastructure on the Inuit homeland requires their free, prior, and informed consent and engagement under existing land claims and agreements. The territorial governments bring the civilian infrastructure knowledge and community relationships that stem from lived experience in the North. And finally, our industry partners are where our proposed job targets ultimately materialize. Next slide, please.
So we've identified 4 key risks and we propose mitigations. Under the US, Canada's defense industrial base uses a model of complementary, not competition, to American supply chains. NORAD modernization framing positions all investments as strengthening continental defense as a whole. For cost overruns, NanoCivic's budget has more than doubled. Phased deployment with TBS oversight and outcome-based contracting transfers some cost risk to suppliers. For Indigenous approval, FPAC is a legal and moral obligation. The Defense Minister acknowledged that NanoCivic's failures stem from not considering local context. And for procurement delays, the DIA is designed to cut red tape, but structural reform does take time. Pre-qualified supplier pools and outcome-based contracting accelerate these timelines. Next slide, please.
Thank you. Phase 1 of our communication strategy focuses on what Canadians care about: Arctic housing, infrastructure, and Canadian jobs. We begin with security that strengthens prosperity, making clear that national security investments will build capacity here at home. Phase 2 shifts from promise to delivery. Defense contracts flow to Canadian firms, and Canada reduces its supply dependence on the United States. After COVID-19 disruptions and tariff tensions, Canadians understand the risks of relying on a single partner. Phase 3 is aspirational and achievable. Canada has a sustained Arctic presence, retains intellectual property and contracts, and maintains year-round northern capability. We are also on track to meet our 5% NATO commitment by 2035, positioning Canada strongly for the 2029 review. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much for your time this morning. As we've emphasized, Canada is at a turning point. We've identified key threats in military degradation, Arctic vulnerability, and digital exposure. And we strongly believe that our Sovereign Capabilities Initiative is the right option for this historic moment for our nation. Thank you for your consideration, and we look forward to any questions that you may have.
We are most thankful for all the work you've done. It's that you got together and get to collaborate over the last 10 days. It is a Saturday, and it's wonderful to see all the great work you did. And it's so great that you are participating in such a effective way. So we are all very, very thankful for your participation and for your interesting insight into this. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Kimberly, to ask about specific issues around information, disinformation around, and possibly also around how we procure for all this. Kimberly?
Great, thanks Noah, and thank you for the presentation this morning. Maybe just a couple of questions for you along a few threads of your presentation. The first, as Noah mentioned, disinformation, misinformation, and I think really social cohesion. So I think your policy will likely, or your strategy is going to demand some sacrifices on Canadians, and it's very focused on a certain region of Canada. How will you ensure in an era of rampant disinformation and misinformation that your strategy doesn't further the divide or the lack of cohesion that's already starting to appear in Canadian society along certain lines by focusing in one area? Another question I want to ask, the strategy seems to be very focused on enhancing Canada's sovereign capabilities in certain sectors. Those sectors will rely a fair amount, at least initially, on procurement from outside of Canada, and I understand the desire to do that from outside the US. But those are supply chains that are hard to firm up in some of the core minerals and capability sectors. So how will you ensure that the supply chain can meet the demand that we're placing on it? And a very specific question about why you think it's worth maintaining NanoCivic. I come from defense. I'm just very curious about why NanoCivic was drawn out so much in your presentation. Thanks.
Absolutely. So I can respond to those. So first, regarding the national unity, particularly vis-a-vis disinformation. So we do have a particular emphasis on guarding particularly Canadian businesses underneath the Canadian Protection for Cybersecurity certification. So we focus on that. That will improve both Canadian protocols for disinformation and cyber attacks, as well as training for those individual companies. And regarding the Canadian unity perspective, our priorities particularly are focusing on a physical infrastructure, tying the nation together. So this is particularly through connecting the Arctic towards the lower mainland of Canada through railroads and infrastructure of that nature. And so that is where particularly we're focusing on that. And additionally, because the procurement strategy and the Canadian businesses that we're proposing to partner with is going to be spread across Canada, we hope that the economic benefits that we've identified within supporting and strengthening these Canadian businesses will be felt perhaps not proportionally across all the provinces and territories, but at least in an impactful and meaningful way. Regarding the NanoCivic question, we particularly identified that a year-round capability is critical, particularly in the light that some of our potential adversaries have that capability. NanoCivic has already had funding already allocated to it, and progress has been made on that. And so in a climate of particularly stretched and restricted budgets, we propose on just improving NanoCivic as opposed to creating an entirely new infrastructure that NanoCivic is proposed to address. And then to your final question regarding the critical minerals and the supply chains, it is true that a lot of the supply chains are foreign-based and that we would be dependent on that, especially in the initial years of our timeline. However, regarding the critical minerals, Canada is currently a producer of 10 of the 12 critical defense-related minerals that NATO has identified. And so that's why our industry and our priority is focused on providing mechanisms for the industry to access those within the domestic market to speed up and assist us in that supply chain endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. My colleague Violetta has expertise in strategy and operations, and she will very likely have a question for you. Violetta?
For sure I do. Thank you, Noah, and thank you, team, for your presentation this afternoon. So I saw how you laid out your roadmap with a lot of integrated facets and interventions under that. It was, I believe, a 10-year roadmap that you had. So there's always a need or attention to balance between strengthening capabilities to sustain every change that we be making through this strategy. And yet we need to be prepared to respond immediately. So how does your strategy balance these competing priorities?
I can take that one on. So our strategies actually incorporated a lot of what the defense industrial strategy is already proposing to do. So those measures are already in place. What we would be doing is sort of facilitating that into actual action. And because the national security landscape in terms of defense and digital systems, a lot of this takes time. So we have it across a 10-year timeline for that reason. So the immediate deliverables would be starting to show up in phase 2 when we start initiating the data center, but they would also be showing up in the beginning when we start hiring a lot of people for these initiatives to kickstart.
Can also jump in there to speak a little bit about sort of the evaluation perspective. So if we can go down to Appendix D, we designed a brief evaluation that we could use to sort of to assess what our KPIs would be and to make sure that we're on track. I think 2 slides beyond this one, it'll be the last slide. We have a structured evaluation happening at year 4, but all of the statistics and the measures that we're including here are things that are measured by the federal government already, and these are things that can be sort of looked at any point in time. The sort of the fullest evaluation will happen halfway through the 10-year strategy, but these are things that, you know, if we see that something's off or that something's sort of heading in the wrong direction, we can pivot quite quickly. So we do have the data to support which direction we should pivot in.
Very good. Thank you. That's very important. Thanks.
Thanks so much. I can ask the next question. One of the very important aspects of national security, both from a threat and a partner perspective, is the international perspective. So you don't have a lot about what Canada's strategy should be around allies, around adversaries, around allies that are now adversaries. Can you talk about some of the international aspects of your pillars and your priority?
Sure. So again, as you pointed out, the crux of our proposal is a domestic sourcing in alignment with you, Prime Minister, your policy priority objectives. However, we are cognizant of the role that the international stage has on this. So we did identify that Canada, under this proposal, will partner with the EU's efforts to develop an alternative to the American options regarding AI. So that is a particular criteria. Additionally, we are also cognizant of the policy commitments and the international frameworks that Canada has already committed, especially under recent developments that you, Prime Minister, have identified, such as joining SAFE with the EU. And so we felt that primarily we have the international stage has been largely taken care of, with the exception of the Arctic, of course, and that we need to shift to producing primarily domestic equipment, or at least in terms of when we're procuring foreign equipment, to ensure that we have the sovereign capabilities such as the source code and the IP of that domestic equipment, so that we can act on our own as an independent partner, and then at a later stage in conjunction with our partners on the international stage. But considering the fluidity of the international stage at this current moment, we decided to prioritize, in particular, Canada's domestic abilities. Thank you.
Vincent? You're muted, Vince.
Apologies. I'm glad that Kim mentioned NanoCivic, because I was actually the ADM policy in D&D when we announced NanoCivic in 2007. And I've always found it amazing that we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of that announcement, and we still don't have a deep water port. It's quite something. It just shows you how difficult it is to get stuff done in the Arctic. Just building on Noah's question, can you talk a little bit more about the risks and the mitigation, specifically the U.S. diplomatic backlash? You've got that as the first risk. And so can you just unpack a little bit, what do you think the U.S. reaction might be here? And is there an opportunity for us to work with the United States in the Arctic? Can we walk a tightrope here? And will there be opportunities? Because you do talk about NORAD modernization alignment, and that is actually how you'd like to frame a lot of the initiatives, maybe not all, but a lot of them. But if you could unpack the U.S. angle a little bit, that'd be great.
Yeah, definitely. I can take that on. I know that the U.S. is sort of one of the biggest topics of conversation in international relations and in national security at the moment, and so we did consider them quite strongly. That is why we've included them in our risks and mitigations sort of slide here. What we did in considering them was we sort of divided the U.S. into several different sub-stakeholders. So we considered that sort of the president would have certain perspectives, but the legislative branches would have different perspectives, possibly. We know that we do a lot of trade with northern states, and so we need to sort of consider all of those things individually. And when all those things are considered together, we do feel that there is a risk of U.S. diplomatic backlash coming from sort of the highest levels of the United States government. But the way that we are looking to mitigate that, as you said, is through sort of this view that we are on the same continent and we are sort of trying to um, uh, we're trying to sort of respond to some of the adversaries that exist in the East. And so I think that there probably is some space to walk the line with the United States and with other sort of more allied countries that exist in North America and in North Europe. NATO, for example, would be
Okay,
one
we're
of
gonna
those
have to leave it.
organizations.
We're gonna have to stop it there. We're at time. Thank you.